The first photo arrived on a Tuesday morning. My house. My grandmother's house. Reduced to nothing but broken wood and twisted metal scattered across the lot. The message was simple, brutal. Just a photo of the demolition and 3 words from my husband Marcus. All gone now. I stared at the image, my phone trembling in my hands. 27 years of marriage. 34 years of memories in that house. The kitchen where I'd learned to cook from my grandmother. The porch swing where Marcus first told me he loved me. The nursery we'd painted together, dreaming of the children we never had. All gone now. My coworker Lisa found me in the bathroom, sobbing against the cold tile wall. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep, where the bones meet the soul. Sarah, what happened? She pulled me into her arms, and I couldn't speak. Couldn't find words for this betrayal. The story came out in broken pieces. How Marcus and I had been fighting for months about the house. How he wanted to sell it, relocate closer to his struggling construction business. How I'd refused, again and again, because that house wasn't just wood and brick. It was my grandmother's legacy. My anchor. He said he was going to a job site in Phoenix. I whispered. 3 days away. I thought maybe the space would help us figure things out. But Marcus hadn't gone to Phoenix. He'd gone to my house. With a bulldozer. The second photo came an hour later. The lot, scraped clean. Even the old oak tree my grandmother had planted was gone. Just dirt and scattered debris where my entire history used to stand. I called him. Of course I called him. You destroyed my house. The words came out flat, emotionless. Shock, maybe. Or something deeper. Our house, Marcus corrected. And I didn't destroy it. I demolished it. There's a difference. The casual way he said it, like he'd mowed the lawn or fixed a leaky faucet. You had no right. I had every right. My name was on the deed too, remember? We inherited it together when your grandmother died. Technically, he was right. When Grandma Rose passed 5 years ago, she'd left the house to both of us. It was her way of making sure we'd always have something solid, something that couldn't be taken away. She never imagined that the person who'd take it away would be the man I'd married. I filed for divorce this morning, I said. Silence on the other end. Then Marcus laughed. Actually laughed. With what money? You think that office job of yours is going to pay for lawyers? I own half of everything you've got, Sarah, including whatever we could have made selling that old house. The line went dead. I sat in my car in the office parking lot, staring at the photos of my destroyed home, and something cold settled in my chest. Something that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with calculation. Marcus thought he'd won. Thought he'd finally gotten his way by sheer force, like a toddler throwing a tantrum until the adult gives in. He had no idea what he'd actually done. The first call I made was to my real estate agent, Jennifer Kim. We'd worked together before, when I'd helped my elderly neighbor Mrs. Patterson sell her home and move to assisted living. Sarah, I was just thinking about you. How are things? Jennifer, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. That property assessment you did on my grandmother's house last month, when you said it was worth $400,000, were you being conservative? A pause. Sarah, is everything okay? You sound. The house is gone. Marcus demolished it while I was at work. But I need to know, was $400,000 the real value? Jennifer's intake of breath was sharp. Oh my God, Sarah. No, 400 was the conservative estimate. Given the location, the lot size, and the way that neighborhood's been developing, I'd say it was worth at least 600,000. Maybe more to the right buyer. 600,000. For a house Marcus had claimed was worthless. A house he'd said was holding us back, draining our resources, keeping us trapped in the past. Jennifer, I need to ask you about something else. Hypothetically, if someone demolished a house without the other owner's consent, but both names were on the deed, would that be legal? Hypothetically?
No.
Absolutely not. Joint ownership means joint decision-making. What happened to your house? Sarah, that's destruction of property. That's grounds for a lawsuit. Maybe even criminal charges. My hands were steadier now. The shock was burning away, replaced by something sharper. One more question. Marcus Hartwell Construction. Do you know anything about their properties? Their business locations? I know they've been struggling. There were some rumors about missed payments, creditors circling. Why? Just curious. But I wasn't just curious. I was calculating. The Marcus I'd married 27 years ago had been ambitious, hardworking, full of dreams about building beautiful homes and creating lasting structures. Somewhere along the way, those dreams had soured into desperation. His business had started failing 3 years ago, and every conversation we'd had since then had somehow circled back to money, to the house, to how we needed to liquidate everything we could to keep his company afloat. I'd said no. Again and again, I'd said no. So, he'd found another way to get what he wanted. The thing is, Marcus had always underestimated me. In his mind, I was just the office worker, the supportive wife, the woman who paid the household bills while he built his empire. He never bothered to learn what I actually did at Meridian Financial Services. If he had, he might have known that I specialized in real estate transactions. Complex ones. The kind that required understanding property law, market analysis, and strategic timing. The kind that required knowing how to move fast when opportunities presented themselves. 3 months ago, when Marcus had started pressuring me harder about selling the house, I'd done something I'd never done before in our marriage. I'd protected myself. Quietly, carefully, without his knowledge. The process had taken weeks. First, I'd consulted with a lawyer about my rights regarding the property. Then I'd had a private real estate assessment done, learning what Jennifer had just confirmed, that the house was worth far more than Marcus realized. But most importantly, I'd researched something else entirely. Marcus Hartwell Construction was hemorrhaging money. Behind the confident facade he presented to me, behind the talk of temporary setbacks and upcoming contracts, his business was circling the drain. He owed money everywhere. Suppliers, contractors, equipment leases. His main office and warehouse were mortgaged to the hilt, and he was 3 months behind on the loan payments. I knew because I'd pulled his credit reports. Legally, as his spouse, I had access to our joint financial information. What I'd found had kept me awake for weeks. Marcus wasn't just struggling. He was desperate. Desperate enough to destroy the one thing I'd asked him never to touch. The second call I made was to Robert Chen, a real estate investor I'd met through work. Robert specialized in quick property acquisitions, cash deals, situations where sellers needed to move fast. Sarah, this is unexpected. How can I help you? Robert, I have a proposition for you. It's unconventional, but I think it might interest you. I'm listening. There's a property that's about to come on the market. Industrial location, currently housing a struggling construction company. The owner is behind on payments, facing foreclosure within the month. I have reason to believe it could be acquired for significantly below market value. What's the catch?
No catch.
Just a very motivated seller who doesn't know he's about to become a motivated seller. And you know all this how? The question I'd been waiting for. The one that would determine whether this plan would work or whether I'd have to find another path forward. Because the construction company belongs to my soon-to-be ex-husband, and I have access to all his financial records. Silence on Robert's end. Then, slowly, Sarah, I need you to be very clear about what you're suggesting. I'm suggesting that when Hartwell Construction defaults on their property loan next month, you're positioned to make a cash offer immediately. Fair market value. Legal. Ethical. Just. Strategic. And what do you get out of this? Partnership. I provide the information. You provide the capital. We split the profits when the property inevitably appreciates. Another pause. This is about revenge, isn't it? The word hung in the air between us. Revenge. Such a simple word for such a complicated feeling. This is about justice, I said finally. There's a difference. Robert agreed to meet the next morning. That night, I sat in my apartment, the same small place I'd lived in before Marcus and I got married, which I'd kept as a rental property all these years, and looked through the photos on my phone. Pictures of the house across 3 decades. Marcus and me on the front porch the day we got engaged. Christmas mornings in the living room. My grandmother's last birthday party in the backyard, just months before she died. All gone now. But as I scrolled through the images, I found something else. Photos from last month, when I'd been documenting the house's condition for the real estate assessment. Photos that showed something Marcus had overlooked in his rage to destroy my memories. The basement. The finished basement my grandmother had converted into a workshop in the 1990s. With its separate entrance, its own electrical system, its own heating unit. Technically, under city zoning laws, it qualified as a separate structure. A separate structure that Marcus had demolished without obtaining proper permits. I made a note to call the city planning office in the morning. The meeting with Robert went exactly as I'd hoped. He was intrigued by the opportunity, impressed by my research, and confident that the timeline would work in our favor. Hartwell Construction owes $230,000 on their property loan, he confirmed after running his own financial check. Property's worth at least $400,000 in the current market. If we can acquire it for close to the loan amount, we're looking at substantial profit potential. When do you expect the foreclosure notice? Any day now. Marcus Hartwell's been dodging his lender for months. They're done waiting. Perfect. The third call I made was to my lawyer, Patricia Williams. Patricia had handled my grandmother's estate, and she knew the history of the property better than anyone. Sarah, I heard about what happened. I'm so sorry. That house was special. Patricia, I need to know my options. Legal options. For divorce proceedings? Of course. I can recommend several excellent. Not just divorce. I need to know about criminal charges, civil suits. I need to know about making Marcus pay for what he did. Patricia's tone shifted, becoming more professional. Tell me exactly what happened. Everything. I laid out the timeline. How Marcus had waited until I was at work. How he'd brought in a demolition crew without proper permits. How he destroyed not just the main house, but the basement workshop that qualified as a separate structure. Sarah, if what you're telling me is accurate, Marcus has committed several crimes. Destruction of property. Illegal demolition. Possibly fraud if he misrepresented his ownership rights to the demolition crew. What kind of penalties are we talking about? Criminal penalties could include fines, restitution, possibly even jail time. Civil penalties could be substantial. You could sue for the full value of the property, plus emotional damages, plus punitive damages. How substantial? Given the property value you've mentioned, we could be looking at a 7-figure settlement. 7 figures. More money than Marcus had ever made in his best year of business. Money he'd never be able to pay. There's something else, Patricia continued. If Marcus demolished the house hoping to force a sale and split the proceeds, but the house is gone, he's actually in a worse position than before. How so? He destroyed an asset worth $600,000. Even if he owned half, he's now liable for damages to your half. $300,000 minimum.
Plus penalty.
Plus legal fees. So, he went from owning half of something valuable to owing all of something expensive. Exactly. The pieces were falling into place. But I wasn't done yet. Marcus called me that evening, his voice falsely cheerful. Sarah, I know you're upset, but I think in a few weeks you'll see that this was the right decision. We can split the value of the land. Both start fresh. Maybe this is exactly what we needed to move forward. What land value are you talking about, Marcus? Well, I had the lot appraised after the demolition. We're looking at about $200,000. Not as much as I'd hoped, but it's something. $200,000. He'd destroyed a $600,000 property and thought he'd created a $200,000 opportunity. Have you listed it yet? Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first. Work out the division.
That's thoughtful of you.
Sarah, I know I should have discussed this with you first, but... Marcus, do you remember when we got married? What you said in your vows. The question caught him off guard. What? Your vows. You promised to honor me.
To respect me.
To build a life together. Sarah, I don't understand. The house wasn't just property to me. It was my grandmother's legacy. It was our history. And you destroyed it without even asking me. I was trying to save our future. No, Marcus. You were trying to save your business. With my inheritance. Silence. I filed for divorce. The papers will be served tomorrow. Sarah, wait. I also filed a police report for destruction of property. And I've retained a lawyer for the civil suit. You what? I'll see you in court, Marcus. I hung up before he could respond. The next week moved like a controlled avalanche. Each day brought new developments, new information, new confirmation that the plan was working exactly as I'd hoped. The police investigation confirmed what Patricia had suspected. Marcus had demolished the house without proper permits. He'd also failed to check for utility lines, causing gas and water line damage that would cost the city thousands to repair. The civil suit moved forward quickly. Patricia had been conservative in her initial estimate. The actual damages were even higher than she'd projected. And Robert called with the news I'd been waiting for. Foreclosure notice was served this morning. Hartwell Construction has 30 days to bring the loan current or forfeit the property. How much would Marcus need to keep the building? $230,000 plus fees and penalties. Call it $250,000 total. Money Marcus didn't have. Money he'd hoped to get by destroying my house. Money he'd never see now. But the most satisfying development came from an unexpected source. Jennifer Kim called on Friday with news that made everything else pale in comparison. Sarah, I've been thinking about your situation all week, and I had an idea. I know this might sound crazy, but hear me out.
I'm listening.
What if we approach the lot purchase from a different angle? Instead of treating it as residential property, what if we positioned it as commercial development potential? What do you mean? That neighborhood is zoned for mixed-use development. With the right permits, that lot could be used for retail, office space, even multi-unit housing. The value could be significantly higher than residential. How much higher? Potentially $800,000. Maybe more. $800,000. For the empty lot that Marcus thought was worth $200,000. Jennifer, I need you to put together a development proposal. Detailed plans, cost estimates, profit projections. Can you do that? Of course. But Sarah, development projects require significant capital. Are you sure you want to take this on? I'm sure. And I have a partner who might be very interested in expanding our collaboration. When I called Robert with Jennifer's proposal, his response was immediate. You're talking about turning this from a simple property flip into a major development project. I'm talking about turning it into a statement. Marcus destroyed my house thinking he could force me to accept scraps. Instead, I'm going to build something 3 times more valuable in its place. Sarah, I admire the poetry of it, but development projects are risky.
Complex.
Are you prepared for that level of involvement? Robert, I've spent the last 27 years managing a man who thought he could make decisions for both of us without consulting me. I think I can handle managing a development project. He agreed to review the proposal. The foreclosure auction was scheduled for the following month. If everything went according to plan, Robert would acquire Marcus's business property for the outstanding loan amount. Then we'd use that property as collateral for a development loan on my grandmother's lot. Marcus would lose his business. I would transform my destroyed house into something worth nearly $1 million. But first, I had to survive the divorce proceedings. Marcus had hired a lawyer. Not a good one, apparently, because his first strategy was to claim that I'd somehow forced him to demolish the house. My client was under severe financial stress, his attorney argued during our first mediation session. Mrs. Hartwell's refusal to consider selling the property left him with no viable options to save his struggling business. Patricia's response was swift and brutal. Mr. Hartwell's financial problems are not Mrs. Hartwell's responsibility. Destroying marital property without consent is not a legal remedy for personal debt. It's a crime. The property was jointly owned. Joint ownership requires joint decision-making. Mr. Hartwell acted unilaterally, illegally, and with full knowledge that his wife opposed the demolition. Marcus sat across the conference table from me, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. The confident entrepreneur who'd swept me off my feet 3 decades ago had been replaced by a desperate man whose schemes were crumbling around him. "Sarah, please," he said during a break in the proceedings. "Can we talk privately?" "We can talk here, with our lawyers present. I made a mistake. I know that. But we can fix this. We can work together like we always have." "Like we always have." "Marcus, you destroyed my house. Without asking me. Without telling me. You erased 34 years of my life because you thought you knew better. I was trying to save us."
No.
"You were trying to save yourself. There's a difference." The mediator returned, and Marcus's lawyer made one final offer. "My client is prepared to waive any claim to the remaining property value in exchange for Mrs. Hartwell dropping the criminal charges and the civil suit." Patricia didn't even hesitate. "Absolutely not. Mrs. Hartwell is entitled to full damages, plus penalties, plus legal fees. Your client's criminal exposure is a separate matter entirely." The mediation ended without resolution, which meant we were headed to court. But I wasn't worried about court. I was focused on the next phase of the plan. The foreclosure auction was held on a gray Tuesday morning in the county courthouse. I'd never attended a foreclosure auction before, but Robert had walked me through the process. "It'll be fast," he'd explained. "They'll start with the minimum bid, the outstanding loan amount. If no one bids higher, the bank takes the property. And if someone does bid higher, then we bid higher than them, up to our maximum." Our maximum was $300,000. More than enough, Robert assured me, to win the auction. Marcus wasn't there. I'd wondered if he might show up, might try to make some last-minute deal to save his business. But his absence told me everything I needed to know about his financial state.
He was done.
Finished. Out of options. The auctioneer's voice echoed through the courthouse lobby. "Next property, 4756, Industrial Boulevard, currently housing Hartwell Construction. Outstanding debt, $237,000. Do I hear a bid?" Robert raised his hand. $240,000. $240. Do I hear 50? Silence. 240 going once, going twice. Sold for $240,000. That was it. Marcus's business, the warehouse and office space he'd built over 15 years, was now owned by Robert Chin. And through our partnership agreement, I owned half of it. The irony was perfect. Marcus had destroyed my property to save his business. Now I owned his business, and he owned nothing. But the real vindication was still to come. Patricia called me the next morning with news about the criminal case. The district attorney's office has decided to press charges. Marcus is being charged with criminal mischief in the first degree, a felony. What does that mean? It means he faces up to 7 years in prison and restitution up to twice the value of the damage he caused. Twice the value. On a $600,000 property, that meant Marcus could owe me over $1 million. Will he actually go to prison? For first offense? Probably not. But the restitution is legally binding. He'll owe you that money whether he serves time or not. Money he'd never be able to pay. Marcus's business was gone, his assets were minimal, and his earning potential was limited. The restitution order would follow him for the rest of his life. Meanwhile, the development project on my grandmother's lot was moving forward rapidly. Jennifer had found a contractor who specialized in mixed-use developments, and the preliminary plans looked incredible. A small retail space on the ground floor, professional offices on the second floor, and 2 residential units on the 3rd floor. Modern, elegant, exactly the kind of development that neighborhood needed. Total project value, $900,000. The construction loan would be secured by the industrial property Robert had acquired, the property that used to belong to Marcus. So Marcus's former business would directly fund the reconstruction of everything he'd destroyed. The morning of our divorce hearing, I stood in my bathroom mirror, adjusting the navy blue suit I'd chosen for the occasion. Professional, dignified, uncompromising. Marcus had asked for spousal support. His lawyer claimed he was too devastated by the collapse of his business to work effectively. Patricia's counterargument was simple. Marcus had destroyed his own marriage and his own financial future through criminal behavior. He deserved nothing. Judge Morrison was a woman in her 60s who'd been handling family court cases for over 20 years. She'd reviewed all the documents, listened to both sides, and reached a decision that surprised no one. Mr. Hartwell, your actions in this case represent a profound violation of trust and partnership. You unilaterally destroyed marital property worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, committed felony crimes in the process, and now seek financial support from the very person you betrayed. Marcus's lawyer started to respond, but Judge Morrison held up her hand. I'm not finished. Mrs. Hartwell, you've demonstrated remarkable restraint and strategic thinking in responding to your husband's destructive behavior. You've protected your own interests while pursuing justice through proper legal channels. She reviewed her notes one final time. The divorce is granted. No spousal support awarded. All remaining marital assets to be divided according to the prenuptial agreement signed in 1997. Prenuptial agreement. Marcus had insisted on it when we got married, claiming it would protect both of us. Looking back, I think he'd been protecting himself from the beginning. But prenups work both ways. The agreement clearly stated that any property inherited by either spouse would remain their separate property, which meant my grandmother's house, and the lot it used to sit on, was entirely mine. Marcus got half of our joint savings account, which amounted to about $3,000. He also got half the value of his business assets, which was zero since the business no longer existed. I walked out of the courthouse that day a divorced woman, a property owner, and the sole beneficiary of what was about to become a $1 million development. Marcus caught up with me in the parking lot. Sarah, wait. I turned around. After everything that had happened, after all the anger and pain and calculation, I was curious what he might have to say. I need you to know that I never meant to hurt you. The words hung in the air between us. Never meant to hurt me. As if the pain had been some kind of accidental side effect of his grand plan. Marcus, you demolished my house. You destroyed the last physical connection I had to my grandmother. You threw away 34 years of memories because you thought your business was more important than my feelings. I was desperate. The business was failing and I thought. You thought you could make a decision for both of us without consulting me, just like you've been doing our entire marriage. He looked older than his 59 years. The stress of the past few months had carved lines around his eyes, turned his hair grayer, bent his shoulders forward in defeat. What happens now? He asked. Now you face the consequences of your choices. And I build something new on the foundation you tried to destroy.
Sarah, I'm sorry.
I know that doesn't change anything, but I am genuinely sorry. The apology I'd been waiting months to hear. It came too late to repair our marriage, but maybe it wasn't too late for something else. Marcus, I believe you're sorry. But being sorry doesn't undo the damage. It doesn't bring back my house. It doesn't restore the trust you broke. I know. The restitution order means you'll be paying me for the rest of your life. Every month, for years and years, you'll write me a check to cover the damage you caused. Is that the legacy you wanted to leave? Marcus looked at the ground.
No.
Then maybe you should have thought about that before you brought in the bulldozer. I turned and walked toward my car. Behind me, Marcus called out one final question. Will you ever forgive me? I stopped walking, but I didn't turn around. I already have, Marcus. But forgiving you doesn't mean forgetting what you did. And it doesn't mean I have to make the consequences disappear. 6 months later, I stood on the construction site where my grandmother's house used to be, watching workers pour the foundation for the new development. Robert had been right about the complexity of the project. Every decision required careful consideration. Every detail demanded attention. But he'd been wrong about one thing. I was more than prepared for this level of involvement. I was energized by it. This wasn't just about building a profitable development. It was about creating something meaningful from the ruins of something precious. The retail space would house a bookstore and cafe, the kind of community gathering place my grandmother would have loved. The offices would provide workspace for small businesses and entrepreneurs, the kind of people who built dreams from determination and hard work. And the residential units would offer housing for young families, the kind of people who understood that a home was more than just an investment. Marcus's restitution checks arrived every month, exactly on time. $2,000, which barely covered the interest on what he owed me. At this rate, he'd be paying me for the next 40 years. The industrial property Robert and I now owned was fully leased, generating steady rental income that funded both our partnership and my personal security. Marcus's former business had become the foundation of my financial independence. But the most satisfying development was completely unexpected. 3 weeks before the new building was scheduled to open, I received a call from Mark Sullivan, the contractor who was handling the construction. "Sarah, I've got some news that might interest you. We've had an inquiry about the retail space from someone who knew your grandmother." "What kind of inquiry?" "A woman named Dorothy Chen. She's Robert's aunt, actually. She wants to know if she can lease the space to open a bakery. Apparently, she and your grandmother were friends back in the day." Dorothy Chen. I remembered her from my grandmother's funeral. A tiny woman with silver hair and flour-dusted hands who'd brought homemade bread to every church potluck for 30 years. "She wants to call it Rose's Bakery," Mark continued. "In honor of your grandmother." Rose's Bakery. In the building that stood where my grandmother's kitchen used to be. Sometimes the universe has a sense of poetry that outpaces even the most carefully planned revenge. I called Dorothy that afternoon, and we met for coffee the next day. She was exactly as I remembered her. Kind, determined, carrying the kind of quiet strength that builds communities one relationship at a time. "Your grandmother taught me to make sourdough starter," she said, showing me a small mason jar she'd brought along. "This is descended from her original culture. It's older than you are." The starter was pale and bubbly, alive with the same microorganisms that had helped feed my family for generations. "I'd like to name the bakery after her, if you'd be comfortable with that." Rose was special. She made everyone feel welcome. "Dorothy, I can't think of anything my grandmother would have loved more." We shook hands on the lease agreement right there in the coffee shop. The opening ceremony for the Rose Building, as it had come to be known, was held on a sunny morning in October. The bookstore, the offices, the apartments, and Dorothy's Bakery were all fully leased and operational. I stood on the sidewalk where my grandmother's front porch used to be, watching families and business owners and neighbors explore the new space. Children ran between the tables at the bakery while their parents browsed books and sipped coffee. Office workers grabbed lunch and chatted with the residential tenants who lived upstairs. It was exactly what a community space should be. Alive, welcoming, full of possibility. Robert joined me on the sidewalk, holding a cup of Dorothy's lavender honey coffee and a paper bag that smelled like fresh cinnamon rolls. "You know, when Marcus demolished your house, he thought he was ending something," Robert said. "He had no idea he was actually beginning something. He gave me the motivation to build something better than what I'd lost. More than that, he gave you the opportunity to become someone you'd never been before. Someone I'd never been before. Not just the supportive wife, not just the quiet office worker, not just the woman who maintained the household while someone else built the dreams. For the first time in my adult life, I was the architect of my own future." My phone buzzed with a text message. Patricia, my lawyer, with an update on Marcus's situation. Restitution payment received on time. Criminal probation proceeding normally. Civil case closed. Marcus was living in a small apartment across town, working as a project manager for another construction company. He'd lost his business, his marriage, and his financial security, but he'd avoided prison and managed to find steady employment. I didn't feel sorry for him, but I didn't hate him anymore either. Hatred requires too much energy, too much focus on the past. I was too busy building the future to waste time on old grievances. The real revenge wasn't making Marcus suffer. The real revenge was succeeding beyond anything he'd thought possible. A year later, Dorothy's Bakery had become the heart of the neighborhood. The Rose building had a waiting list for both residential and office space. Property values in the surrounding area had increased by 20%. And I'd received an offer from a development company to partner on a similar project across town. But the moment I realized I'd truly won came on a Thursday afternoon in November. I was having lunch at Dorothy's Bakery, reviewing proposals for the new development, when I overheard a conversation at the next table. Two women, probably in their 70s, sharing a pot of tea and a plate of Dorothy's famous lemon bars. "I never thought I'd see this neighborhood come back to life," one of them was saying. "When they tore down the old Henderson house, I thought it was the end of the old community feeling." The Henderson house. You know, the yellow house with the big porch. Rose Henderson's place. Such a shame when it was demolished. But look what grew in its place. The woman gestured around the bustling bakery, where children colored at small tables while their parents worked on laptops, where elderly neighbors played chess in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the large windows. "Sometimes the best things come from the worst situations," her friend replied. Rose would have loved seeing all this activity where her house used to be. She was right. My grandmother would have loved seeing her legacy transformed into something that brought the community together instead of just housing one family's memories. Marcus had thought he was taking something from me when he demolished that house. But he'd actually given me something I'd never had before. The opportunity to honor my grandmother's memory by building something that served everyone instead of just preserving something that served only me. That realization changed everything. The revenge I'd planned so carefully, executed so precisely, had become something else entirely. It had become redemption. Not just for the wrongs Marcus had committed, but for the opportunities I'd missed during 34 years of putting someone else's dreams ahead of my own. 3 years after the demolition, I received an unexpected phone call. "Marcus." "Sarah? I hope it's okay that I'm calling." "What do you need, Marcus?" "I don't need anything. I wanted to tell you something." I waited. I drove by the Rose building yesterday. I'd heard about the development, but I'd never seen it in person. And it's beautiful. What you built there. It's better than what was there before. The admission must have cost him something. Pride, maybe. Or the last remnant of the belief that he'd made the right choice. Thank you for saying that. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest. Do you think there's any chance we could have made different choices? Found a way to work together instead of destroying each other? The question I'd asked myself 100 times over the past 3 years. I think we could have made different choices if we'd been different people, I said finally. But we were who we were. You were someone who made decisions for both of us, without consulting me. I was someone who went along with that until I couldn't anymore. And now I make my own decisions. And you live with the consequences of yours. I'm proud of you, Marcus said quietly. I know that probably sounds strange coming from me, but what you accomplished, what you built from the wreckage I left behind. I'm proud of you. After we hung up, I sat in my office in the Rose building, looking out the window at the neighborhood my grandmother had loved and I had transformed. Marcus's call had been an attempt at closure, maybe, or absolution. But I didn't need either of those things from him anymore. I had something better. I had proof that the worst thing that ever happened to me had become the catalyst for the best thing I ever did for myself. The house Marcus demolished had been my past. The business he'd lost had become my foundation. The marriage he destroyed had been replaced by a partnership with my own ambitions. He'd thought he was taking control of our situation by force. Instead, he'd given me control of my own life for the first time. That's the thing about revenge. When it's done right, it stops being about the other person entirely. It becomes about discovering who you are when someone else stops defining your possibilities. Marcus claimed he demolished my house. But what he actually demolished was the version of myself that believed someone else's dreams mattered more than my own. And on the foundation of that demolition, I built something he could never take away. The woman I was always meant to be.